Hey everybody, how's it going? Today we're gonna have a look at some tips and tricks on how to improve your experience in Mythic Plus dungeons. Two main reasons for why I'm making this video. First, we don't have an official release date for Shadowlands, but we've still got a good couple of months until we can play it, and might as well be doing something with your time while we're waiting for humanity to go back to normal. Second, Mythic Plus will be coming as a system in Shadowlands too, so it's a good opportunity to get into good habits early on. With that said, this isn't a guide to turn you into an MDI god or whatever. This is all stuff that's been helpful for me, and I'd say it's more of a beginner's guide meant to explain the structure of the system and how to tackle it. Alright, so the first thing I want to talk about is not actually the dungeon system itself, but an add-on, and that add-on is of course Radar.io. What does it do? Is it important? Do you need it? The short answer is no, you don't need it at all. However, it's important to at least understand how it works because it's currently the main blocker for the less experienced players, and there are ways to work around it, you just need to know how. Radar.io itself doesn't really do much. It only gathers a bunch of data from characters and presents it in a readable and digestible way in the form of one number, which is your Radar.io score. So what is that score based on? It's a very simplistic grading system based on the difficulty of the dungeons you complete. So if, for example, you do a Mythic Freehold +2, your Radar.io score will be 20 because the value of a +2 dungeon is 20 points. If you then do an Atal the Tsar +2 after that, your score will be 40, so they add up. Now if you then go back and do another Freehold, but this time it's a +5 which is worth 50 points, your score will now not be 90, it will instead be 70 because the +5 Freehold replaced the +2 from earlier. So this score is not meant to increase indefinitely, it only goes up as far as you've pushed all of the dungeons from the dungeon journal combined. This is important because even if you don't have the add-on, others that do can still see what score you've got. So if you're, say, trying to queue up for a +12 and the person who's hosting the key wants to complete it in time because they want to push for a 15 to get max loot from the chest and be done for the week, or they just want to push to get as much residuum as they can, or they just want to boost their own IO score, it doesn't really matter what the reason is. So long as they see that you haven't even come close to completing that type of content, they're not likely to invite you. So what can you do about that? Well, my suggestion will be not to go after high level keys. Not in the beginning at least. You don't need them right off the bat, even though they give a higher score. As a starting benchmark, you should aim to have a score of around 1000, which probably sounds like a lot, but it's really not, and it's easy to achieve, and most importantly, it will get you on the radar of people when inviting you. Now let's say that you somehow manage to complete in time half of all the dungeons from the dungeon journal at a +10 level, which can be quite a grueling task even for experienced players if they aren't well geared enough or they're not familiar enough with the mechanics of the dungeon. You'll have a Radar.io score of 600. Now that's good, you know, you're more than halfway there. However, if you complete all dungeons at a +6 level, which is far easier without a doubt, and you'll see why after I get into affixes, you'll have a total of 720 Radar.io score. Numbers count, and it's far more valuable to have all dungeons completed rather than having a few of them completed at a high level. If you then push all of those +6s to +9s, your score will be 1080, and you'll have reached your first major benchmark without even touching +10s or above. Now I know this is a little counterintuitive, especially considering that you'll have to do a lot of dungeons that you have no interest in at all. Either because the gear has bad stats on it, or maybe you need a two-handed weapon and the dungeon you're doing doesn't have it, or you need a certain trinket, whatever. The Mythic Plus system as a whole is a bit of a hot mess right now, but that has more to do with Blizzard's design choices. And the benefits of doing things this way go beyond just people inviting you more often. First off, because Mythic Plus dungeons can be farmed indefinitely, Blizzard were afraid that people would gear up too fast, with a multitude of builds and choices from items, and we'd all be having too much fun, and with that terrifying thought in mind, they plummeted the drop chance of items so hard that they've literally hit the Earth's crust, shot right through it, and went off on the other side into nowhere space. So once again, numbers count. The more dungeons you do, the higher the odds of getting something out of them. Even if the items that drop have shit stats, where it's not really the trinket that you wanted or whatever, if it's higher item level or has a socket or a corruption effect, it will still be an upgrade. Especially when it comes down to primary stats. Having more strength, agility, or intellect really is more important in the beginning rather than having ideal secondary stats. They have more of an immediate impact on your spells and abilities. Second is, you only really need to do this kind of grind once. After you've pushed your IO score high enough where you're comfortable with the groups you can join, you can then just focus on doing the dungeons you're interested in to get the best rewards out of them. Not only that, but once a season resets, your IO score will reset as well. However, it'll still show your previous season score, so people will still know that you've completed the content and you're aware of what needs to be done. Not only that, but your odds will also show your main's IO score, so you don't need to do the same thing over and over on every single character. The add-on will consider the character where you have the most progression on as your main by default. Just choose one character where you want to complete everything and you're golden. By gradually completing all of this content, you will just naturally become a better player. World of Warcraft is an exercise in repetition and consistency. You repeat instances and boss fights and all of that to learn the mechanics, and then you aim to consistently perform well in order to complete the content and get the rewards at the end of it. Also, odds are some of the dungeons you never would have wanted to do on your main, you would have had to do on your alt. But if you've already done them, you should have learned most, if not all, mechanics and routes, and your experience will overall be a much smoother one. Alright, so that was quite a lot of information, and I haven't even gotten into affixes yet, but honestly, everything I've said so far is already a good enough guideline to get you started. However, there are still a few important things you should know, so we'll go through the whole thing real quick. As you progress through the keys, damage and health modifiers will be applied across the board on all enemy NPCs, as you can see in this list. But more important are the affixes that gradually start affecting the dungeon. Starting with +2 and +3 dungeons, you will get your first affix, which will be one of these two, Tyrannical or Fortified, which will alternate every week. Tyrannical increases the health of all bosses by 40% and damage by 15%, while Fortified increases all trash packs health by 20% and damage by 30%. These two are really important to note because they shape the way you need to focus your DPS cooldowns, defensive cooldowns, healing cooldowns, everything as a group. During a Fortified week, you'll find that trash packs will become ass-clenchingly difficult to deal with, while bosses are a bit of a brief joke in between densely packed minefields, so the focus should be on area of effect damage. Talents, Azerite traits, trinkets, even alchemy potions like Empowered Proximity or Bursting Blood, anything you can do that will reasonably increase your AoE capacity is welcome. Meanwhile, during Tyrannical weeks, the reverse is true and single target damage should be prioritized. Tanks and healers just generally need to pay attention all the time. Then from +4 up to +6, you get the second affix on top of everything else, which will be one of the following 5: Teeming, Raging, Bolstering, Sanguine, or Bursting. Notably difficult here are Bolstering and Bursting, simply because they scale way worse than the other 3. During Bolstering, enemies that die buff up all of their nearby allies with an extra 20% health and damage. So if you pull 10 enemies and kill one of them, all other 9 guys will be buffed. If you then kill another one, all other 8 ones get buffed again. If you continue like that, then by the time you get to the last guy, even if it's just a tiny little larva, it will have been boosted to a level beyond what even the wettest of Sargeras' dreams could have produced, and it will one-shot you all. And even if your tank could take it, it'll just be a waste of time while you're struggling to kill it. The secret here is to bring down all enemies' health pools equally, and always be on the lookout for the ones with the largest health pools to focus them down before the others die. On the flip side, Bursting is pretty much the opposite. Kill an enemy and it will apply a debuff on all your party, dealing 14% of your total health as damage over 4 seconds. That's total health, not current health, and it stacks indefinitely, and it refreshes the 4 seconds duration upon stacking. Obviously, the tactic here is to only kill a maximum of 2 to 3 enemies at once. That'll only apply an up to 40% of total health damage debuff, after which wait out for the 4 seconds debuff to drop and then you can proceed with the rest of them. Now, strategies and guides are great and all, but no amount of information will prop you up to handle these perfectly in any given circumstance, especially given the large variety of enemies and dungeons, so it'll be up to you to go in there, feel out how you play against them, and learn as you go. So long as you give yourself the opportunity to learn by gradually going through every single dungeon and gradually increasing the difficulty on all of them, it'll all come naturally to you. I'm just pointing out where you are more likely to struggle. From +7 to +9 dungeons, things really start to devolve into chaos with the third affix, now active on top of everything else. You will have one of the following: Necrotic, Skittish, Volcanic, Explosive, Quaking, or Grievous. Out of this bunch, the most demanding ones I'd say are Necrotic and Explosive. Neither one is particularly difficult to grasp, but both can be incredibly frustrating to deal with. During Necrotic, all enemies apply a healing debuff on melee hits. The debuff stacks to the point of no longer getting heals at all, and it stacks very quickly too, so your tank needs to be able to kite for a good few seconds for the debuff to drop. RIP if you're a Blood Death Knight during this week. And Explosive spawns little bombs that blow up after 5 or 6 seconds for 40% of your total health as damage. They can be killed really fast as they've got low health. However, the issue with them is that it's really fucking difficult to target them with WoW's interface. And And they're not affected by AoE spells, because then you just do your usual AoE rotation and never notice them if they just caught up in the noise. So you have to select them with the tap targeting that never prioritizes them. This one is just unavoidable, and you have to learn how to click on them really fast, either on their model or their health bar, whichever is more comfortable for you. They can be line of sighted, so you can hide behind a wall or something to avoid the damage, and they can also be outranged, but this is not going to consistently be an option throughout any dungeon. It's best that you learn how to deal with them firsthand, and then as you move up in difficulty, you can start looking into specific guides for each dungeon and see when it's ideal to skip things or not. But once you've dealt with them a couple of times, you get the hang of it, and honestly, this is pretty much the peak of difficulty in Mythic Plus for beginners. If you can deal with these, you can deal with anything else the dungeons throw at you. Besides all of this, there's only one more affix for plus 10 dungeons onwards, and that's the seasonal affix. But that one deserves an entire video on its own, and this should already be enough to get you started if you're struggling to even come close to plus 10 dungeons. There's two more things I'd like to add before I end the video. First off, the affixes are already set in stone on how they're going to be paired up, and you can always check the list on Wowhead to see what's coming next, so you know how to prepare yourself for the next week. To do this, all you need to do is open up Group Finder, go to the Mythic Keystone tab, and check which affixes are active this week, and cross-check them with Wowhead. For example, this week we've got Fortified, Bolstering, and Skittish. That means we're in week 5 of this 12-week rotation, and next week it will be Tyrannical, Bursting, and Necrotic. Both pretty shitty weeks, I have to say. This also gives you the opportunity to identify when you can push higher keys during easier weeks. Weeks that have Quaking, for example, are always a joke compared to the rest of everything else. And second, if you switch from one DPS class to another DPS class, or one healer class to another, it's okay, you can continue your progression where you left off, so long as your gear level can handle it. However, if you're switching from one role to another one that you've never played before, I'd recommend you start from scratch, going through plus 2s all the way back up to plus 9s, because each role has a very distinct gameplay to focus on and individual responsibilities that you can't pick up on the fly. It's better if you ease them in over time. Alright, so with that all said, I hope you find this information useful. If you've liked the video, then give it a like, and if you'd like to see more, make sure to give a sub. I'm not all that good at making YouTube content because I'm a lazy piece of shit, but I try my best. Anyways, hope to see you again real soon. Take care. Bye bye.